When my daughter was about 13, she was in a car accident. And fortunately, she was fine, except she had a really badly broken leg. And she was in the hospital for a couple of weeks, had a lot of surgery, and our refrigerator and our freezer were full of casseroles. The neighbors brought casseroles. Our friends brought casseroles. The church organized, a casserole brigade. So we had more food, and it was all comfort food, it was all this delicious comfort food. And we needed it because it was a hard time when she was in the hospital and going through her recovery and all. So we appreciated all of that and all that support from our little world. But the really awful thing about that is that not 6 months before that accident, she had spent 2 months as an inpatient in a psychiatric hospital. And we didn't get any casseroles. And it's not because our friends or neighbors or the church, didn't want to support us. It's because her dad and I didn't tell anybody. And we didn't tell anybody that she was in a psychiatric hospital because of the stigma.
Mental illness is a medical condition that disrupts a person's thinking, feeling, mood, ability to relate to others, and daily functioning.
Mental illness is more than just depression. It ranges between mood disorders, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, and dissociative disorders. People are afraid of what they do not understand. The media and societal norms create a negative stigma against people living with mental illness.
They've hurt people, murdered them in some cases.
In almost all cases, yes.
Oh, he's a monster. Pure psychopath. So rare to capture one alive.
He made me your alternate.
The only person standing in your way is you.
Mental illness is on a spectrum. Some are more severe than others, but mental illness is more common than you think. 1 in 4 Americans will experience mental illness in a given year.
So when I'm asked that question, the first thing I think about is terminology. That the word mental immediately conveys a very different kind of thing. My first thing is to want to change the term and get it in the realm of psychiatry and call it psychiatric illnesses.
To me, it means, I have a daughter who struggles with serious mental illness. So that's something that my family has lived with for many years. And it's been a struggle. She has had good periods and bad periods and has been hospitalized and been in a lot of different therapeutic programs. And there are a lot of wonderful clinicians out there, psychiatrists and therapists, who offer a lot of help. She's also been a victim of stigma, the stigma that goes along with mental illness, as has her brother, who doesn't suffer from mental illness, but everybody in the family is really impacted by mental illness.
For psychological and emotional reasons, they're just unable to function on a day-to-day basis, and that could happen sort of at all levels. And some of that may be caused by genetic, neurological, medical issues, and it sort of plays itself out in a number of ways with depression, anxiety, mood disorders. So it's just sort of this inability to often function because of these psychological or emotional reasons.
Mental illness, while it's a medical condition, it's different from diabetes and cancer because it can affect someone's thoughts, their emotions, and their behaviors. And so they may act differently from the other kids in school. And when people are different, they're discriminated against, and that's been true in history, whether it's racial discrimination or religious discrimination or sexual orientation discrimination. When you're different, you seem to be fair game for discrimination.
And it's always sad to me that it takes tragedy to bring about better awareness and hopefully reduce stigma.
New details. Want to bring in Meredith Artley. She is managing editor.
At video now from inside
She conveyed to me that she was in a...
People are struggling, and that sometimes those struggles aren't being identified. And what are the systems that are failing to identify people in trouble when they need to be identified? And then what happens when people aren't identified, who are in trouble and who are struggling, and what can be the outcome?
I just think there's a real lack of understanding and awareness. You know, a lot of people just don't.
People living with mental health challenges know that they are not alone, and we've got to be making sure that we're committed to support those fellow Americans. Because struggling with a mental illness or caring for someone who does can be isolating.
One thing about mental illness is that people don't talk about it. I've had other parents say to me, well, why don't you just do X, you know, or why aren't you stricter with your children? And they wouldn't behave that way. You know, sort of no conception of that, of how much that hurts, you know, a parent, because it isn't really true. You know, I could be the absolute best parent in the world, and my daughter would still have this mental illness, this medical condition.
Well, I guess by helping people to understand and give them sort of realistic understanding of mental health as well as mental illness. And I don't know if you're speaking mainly about school. Certainly at school, I know it's done a bit during health, but it's almost as though we should infuse it into everything that we do. When you read an English book about someone with some kind of mental illness, have a discussion about it. Just learn and understand. And for some reason, people get the medical piece, like if somebody has cancer, they get it, they need treatment. And it's the same with mental illness. If somebody is depressed, if they're anxious, they need treatment, and then they can move on. And if we could somehow see those both as more similar than different, I think that would help us sort of remove this stigma.
Through education about the reality of psychiatric disorders, we can help raise awareness and bring an end to stop the stigma.
You can 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 stop the stigma.
Knowledge is power, and by knowing and understanding, you can stop the stigma.
See a street.